Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul Robinson. I'm the Executive Director of RISE. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. This is our second webinar for our Blue Ridge Regional Challenge. We have a special guest here, Terry Nicholson, and I will introduce him shortly. I'd like to run through just some background slides for everyone about the program. On our website is a recording where I talk through all of these slides with more detail. But we want to just touch on the high points here before we start our discussion with Terry. Um, this webinar is meant for you. It's meant for you to have access to ask questions of a subject matter expert who's in the field. This is for you to raise your questions, get his views, get your ideas on this topic area. So we will go through some slides and then I'll introduce Terry and I'll start a discussion with him about his experiences and his knowledge. But after that, or at any point during that discussion, you're welcome to raise your hand and Katie will let me know that there's a question, or you can put the questions in the chat. But we'll kick off here so we don't waste any time straight into discussing the challenge. And again, this is a summary. The topic areas, there we go. The topic areas is as described here. We are trying to we're running our third challenge here. We started off, the first challenge was just very local in this smaller part of the state here. We ran our second challenge last year, which expanded out solutions in early warning systems and insurance, as well as some Terry's program that he was involved with. We expanded it out to a larger region, and this year we're trying to expand these solutions and new solutions to the entire Blue Ridge region, which is this white region here. What became very clear when we started seeing our solutions and the pilots that we were funding was that solutions need to be regional. You cannot just solve for one small community. Everyone's in it together, and there are technical and economic reasons for addressing issues on that sort of a scale. So nationally, we're focused here where my cursor is in this the southwest part of Virginia, but this is the FEMA map for riverine flooding. Very common all up and down the Appalachians here, as well as in the central part of the state and out west. So the idea is if you can develop and show effectiveness in your solutions in our challenge in the Blue Ridge region, they should be scalable and transferable to other regions across the country. And that's the idea. That's what we want to do in helping your companies develop the products and expand out to other regions. I'm going to go through these very quickly, but there's a number of important reasons why you should apply, because you can make a difference. You can work with communities like Terry's, and you will actually be funded to implement and demonstrate how you can protect those communities and measure how effective that is. We also provide you access to resources, obviously funding, but also business assistance and guidance. And then it allows you to prove your product and then expand out to a broader part of the country. And there's also a growing community. RISE has developed an alumni base of about 50 or 60 companies, and it's growing, and they join others across the country. And we also will provide recognition and support for all of the winners' challenges, successful challenges. We fund, depending on how many solutions we get in which areas, we fund up to about $300,000 in non-equity funding. It's non-dilutive, and we fund pilots programs. These are not R&D projects. You have to demonstrate your solution and prove it. And we also provide with PR and a number of other opportunities and support here in the bullets. The challenge timeline is the most important. January 30th is when we launched. February to mid-March is where we are right now. We're having webinars and support the applicants. We are doing the webinars. We have stuff on the websites, but if you have specific questions, call us. Reach out to us by email. We'll set up a discussion. We don't want you to spend too much time on something that doesn't fit, or we're more than happy to give you some advice and direction as to what the sort of thing we're looking for. Again, there's a lot of information on our website, as well as descriptions of the sort of top solutions we're looking for, but we are reachable and you can talk to us at any time before the submissions. Submission deadline, March 20th. We will be announcing semi-finalists by April 6th. We will ask those semi-finalists to submit additional documentation, more details by April 20th. And then we will be having pitch presentations around April 27th and picking the finalists and announcing the funding levels on May 4th. So it's a pretty tight schedule. It's all go. We welcome solutions from all over the world. And we've done this a number of times in the past, and we're excited about doing it again, and this time for such a large region. This gives you an idea of how many challenges we've run, 12. We've funded over 40 pilots at over $10 million. And companies have gone on to raise money, investment funds, private funds from our challenge programs. So we want to help you get to that point. We want your success. Your success is our success, as we say. And so we're very, in our selection and in our support, we want you to succeed. Challenge topics, there are 3 main challenge topics. This one we're talking about today: debris removal and landscape remediation following floods and related hazards. So we'll get into that in some detail in a couple of minutes. The next one is integrated resilience solutions. And by the way, our guest today, Terry, is the city manager of the town of Narrows. So he has expertise in all of these challenge topic areas. So if you have any questions in any of the other topic areas, then feel free. We'll try and focus on the first topic first, but he's more than happy to talk about these other issues. What we've also seen is we are funding and have seen a number of different solutions, and at some point it makes sense to bring them together in an integrated type of product or platform, whatever that might be, and it also helps communities like Terry's manage and integrate the information and the information coming from the products into his operations, and that's an important one. Particularly, some of these communities are resource limited, and they want the benefit of the products, but it's sometimes they don't have the resources to support them. And third is the regional resilience value case. It's very clear, just doing an analysis of a number of homes that get washed away and what it would cost to replace those homes in terms of their replacement, depreciated replacement value. But that goes further, and there's a lot of analysis being done out there that, including with FEMA, that says if you spend $1 in protection, you can raise you can redeem between $6 and $10 back in your protection. Now, that number varies, and sometimes it's easier to prove, particularly in some of the bigger cities and maybe some of the wealthier cities and wealthier communities. But most of the country is not like that. And so we're looking to find organizations that can take these models, the resilience value case models, and apply them to all different communities and see how we can make them work. That's going to allow investment money, if it's successful, allow investment money to come in and help pay for some of these resilience protections. Those are the 3 topic areas. We'll be having webinars over the next few weeks in these other topic areas, but we can touch on them today. And so keep an eye on our website, and our attendees today will receive emails about future sessions. So we welcome you back, and remember to stay in touch with us. That's it. So I will now move to, I'll unshare here. Okay. And we'll move over to talk to our guest here. And again, if you've got questions, raise your hand or put it in the chat, and Katie will let me know. So Terry Nicholson is the town manager of Narrows, Virginia, and is responsible for day-to-day operations of the town government, implementing policies and priorities set by elected officials on the town council. Mr. Nicholson has been in this role since 2022 Terry has previously served as code enforcement officer and residential building inspector for the city of Radford, which is a city nearby. It's a larger city than Narrows, so he really has a lot of experience in different towns. He was a museum administrator for the town of Blacksburg during the restoration of St. Luke and Oddfellows Hall and the planning for the restoration of the Alexander Black House. Terry was the executive director of Historic Smithfield Plantation in Blacksburg and coordinated various outreach and advocacy for Preservation Virginia, the statewide preservation organization which owns Smithfield. In addition, he owned his own business, inspecting and consulting on the restoration of historic properties. Terry studied in the Master of Architecture program at Virginia Tech, focusing on historic preservation. And prior to those studies at Tech, Terry got a BS in chemistry from the College of William and Mary and had a 15-year career as a manager of quality control and quality insurance for BI Chemicals, a pharmaceutical company in Petersburg. So he has a very broad background. And we've worked with Terry over the past couple of years, and it's been great. So thank you for joining us today, Terry. Appreciate your time, and thanks for your wisdom and your interest.
I'm glad to be here.
So let's start here, because you're the town of Narrows. Why don't you describe town of Narrows, where it is, and let's start off talking about your experience with Hurricane Helene about a year and a half ago.
Okay, so the town of Narrows sits directly on the New River. We're in Southwest Virginia. We're in Giles County, which is right on the border with West Virginia. When you think about what happened with Helene, we hear of all the damage that occurred in Western North Carolina, Asheville, that area. Well, that's where the headwaters of the New River is in Blowing Rock, North Carolina. And so all the water that was dumped there was being collected into the New River system. And that's what ultimately arrived at us roughly a day after what was happening in Asheville. The problem that we have here is there are several dams on the New River, one of which is in Radford, where I worked before, and that's a pretty major dam there. And during the flood event from Helene, they were concerned that a dam one upstream from the Claytor Lake Dam was going to fail. And therefore, the Claytor Lake Dam started releasing in the middle of the night. And so we got very little warning about the extra water. So the forecast models had told us a level of flooding that we were going to expect. And as of Friday evening, we were prepared for what we thought was coming to us. But then during the night, that scenario changed, and we ended up with about 4 feet more water than we had anticipated coming. And therefore, we suffered quite a bit of damage in infrastructure and areas that we normally would not have, or at least not what we had planned on. And so that's, kind of an overview in a nutshell of what happened to us. We have a unique situation, not just because of the dam on the New River, but because we also, in our town limits, have 2 smaller creeks that feed into the river here. And we were very fortunate in the sense that neither of those 2 creeks were flooding at the time that the river crested. And had that been the case, it would have been much worse for the town because all that extra water would have been trying to get into the river, which was 20 feet above flood stage. So we have a unique forecast situation here, and we have a unique flooding situation here that makes it difficult to consider when you're forecasting what's going to actually happen.
Okay, thanks. So Terry was face to face with the problem. almost at its worst. I mean, it could have been a lot worse, but you saw it, you experienced it. And it was a couple of times. It wasn't just Helene. It was the one last February, which was a little bit different, but was still could have been significant, right?
Indeed. And so the occurrence there, this was on President's Day weekend in 2025. There we had significant rainfall, really a relatively small storm, but it dumped a lot of water very quickly. And it dumped it into the Wolf Creek Basin. And so that creek, one of the smaller creeks that I was mentioning that comes into the river, flooded in its own right. And there they were telling us in the forecast models that this could be one of the worst flooding scenarios ever to occur on Wolf Creek. And of course, we were gun shy at that point because of what had happened to us in Helene. That was just 6 months earlier. And so we were, kind of hyper vigilant in being prepared for that one. And as it turns out, we ended up with really only some basement flooding in several buildings from that storm. We were well prepared for that, dealt with that pretty quickly. But that brings, to bear the point that I'm saying is that had that storm occurred upstream on Wolf Creek when the New River was flooding, it would have backed water up much more significantly on Wolf Creek. And so that's what I'm saying is the difficulty in forecasting there. When Helene happened to us, when we were suffering the flooding, it was sunny out. It was not raining here. The rain had been going on for the week before that. And so our ground was saturated and all of that. But, it was not actively raining here when we had the worst part of the flooding.
So let's sort of turn our attention here to the topic at hand. Um, if we go back to your Helene experience, did you have, because there had been floods before that and there had been damages, but did you have any sense on how much, or had you been able to do any pre-disaster protection, like going to particular spots and cleaning out debris there to make sure that the streams are not constricted, or did you have any knowledge about where you should look for, or what slopes may have been compromised and dangerous?
Well, yes and no. And here's the situation that we have. So when we're anticipating something like that, then we would go around to our storm drainage systems, things like that, where we're handling surface water, and that would be for the rain events that were happening in the week prior to Helene. And so we know the areas where we might have debris that would clog up storm drains and things like that. So we do make efforts to keep those clean. But the volume of debris that was started in western North Carolina and migrated north with the New River. The New River flows north.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the few rivers that does that. So, all the debris that was being collected by the flooding, for the several hundred miles that it took for it to get here, was something we really could not prepare for.
Mhm.
And I know you've probably seen photos of Clater Lake, which is where the main dam is there, and it literally looked like you could walk across the river, the dammed water there, because of the amount of debris that was being held up by the dam. But not all of it got held up. Of course, a lot of it was able to overflow the dam and ended up here. We have the situation where Wolf Creek comes into the New River. It pushes water into our primitive campground, which has its own trees, vegetation. And those trees then collect debris as it flows through that site. So we ended up with debris that was about 15 feet in the air, hung up in trees. It was kind of eerie to be able to stand underneath that and realize how high the water had been where we were standing. But debris 15 feet in the air is pretty difficult to deal with as well. So
Mhm. So, given that situation, what it sounded like you sort of knew what storm drains you were going to look at or check out, but uh, prior to knowing that Helene was going to come and hit your region, did you have any other knowledge about where the debris was, or where you should be checking to prioritize which areas might require inspection?
no, not because of the fact that that debris really was coming on the river itself, you know. So uh, the places that we're collecting it are kind of from natural vegetation or natural eddies in the river, for instance, that will push it into different places. So um, yeah, so it was almost impossible for us to plan for the volume of debris that was going to end up coming to us on the river.
Is there anything? Well, so at that point, when you think back, what would you have liked to have known? Even and when would you like to have known it prior to that event?
Well, and maybe here's a good time to kind of talk through what actually happened for
Yeah.
us with the debris. So, you know, in the creek beds as well, the tributaries into the New River, debris got pushed up into those. You know, all of the areas along the edges of the river were collecting debris as well. You know, we had a number of campgrounds, for instance, where we had a campground that had a 250 campsites in it, and only about 100 of those were able to evacuate in time. So we ended up with, you know, over 100 campers that ended up being pulled into the river. So, you know, became debris itself. So, you know, all of this stuff that had been being collected was now floating on the river and being deposited on the edges wherever it got caught in things. So, you know, what we ended up with in the immediate aftermath of the flooding was, you know, how do we start cleaning up this material? What do we do with it? Uh, and you know, we thought we had a pretty good plan in place for how to be able to do that. We have, you know, a licensed, certified landfill that we can take debris to, both organic and inorganic. So, you know, we had a plan for that. You know, we've got our own trucks, our own dumpsters through our public service authority here. But what ended up happening is all of those systems were overwhelmed. The landfill got to a point where they had to say, okay, we can't take, you know, as much. We're going to have to slow down the pace of what's coming in so that they could handle being able to process it on their site. You know, the number of containers and trucks that we had was pretty quickly overwhelmed by the amount of debris itself. You know, we are looking at it from, I have to look at it from a public side, you know, dealing with what the town itself had, but we have residents here who also had damage that they needed to get rid of debris from their own either homes or their own sites, land parcels as well. So we're trying to create sites that residents can bring debris to and process that as well. You know, so it was kind of the perfect storm, no pun intended, on pulling all of those things together that kind of overwhelmed our system. And what we realized is that, you know, a contingency plan for what happens if, in a risk management scenario, what happens if it's bigger than what we typically would be able to handle.
Mhm.
So we ended up in a lot of cases having to handle material twice. FEMA doesn't like that when you do that because they want to know its point of origin. So you have to basically trace everything from where it came from and therefore, you know, how it's being handled when it's put into the landfill. So that created a number of challenges for us that we were having to adapt to on the fly as the event was happening. And that is actually still ongoing. We're a year and a half out, and we still have some debris in the creek beds that we're having a state contractor come in and finish getting that debris out for the very reason that Paul's alluding to there is how do you prepare for a future flood? You know, we've still got debris from from Helene that if we had another flood, it would complicate. It would back water up farther just because of the debris that's in the creek bed. So, um, it's not a simple fix and it's not a quick fix by any means. So, our one of our ideas is, within our resiliency plan ourselves, how do we delve a little bit deeper into what the contingency plans might need to be if it's something more significant than anybody would imagine at the time we were preparing for this. So,
Um, so I would open it up now to, I mean, we're at the topic at hand here, so I'd welcome questions. Just raise your hand, and we'll bring you into into the discussion. And while people are thinking about that, Terry, who runs the debris management? What part of your organization, which department runs the debris management or removal?
yeah, so that's a good question. So in our case, we're a town within a county. And so the county has a public service authority that handles solid waste management at that level. But, our public works crews are involved in the collection of the debris, figuring out how we're going to get it into containers that then they could manage. The public service authority is not going to go pick it out of the trees when it's in our primitive campground. We have to get it collected, put into some kind of container that they can transport, and then for them to handle it. And that also raises another issue. You've got organic debris, trees, vegetation, things like that, and then you've got all the trash that gets washed into the river during a flood event as well, including in some cases some hazardous waste type things. So sorting of the debris was another thing that we had to on the fly figure out how are we going to do that on the sites where we're collecting it and putting it into containers. So
And who pays for that? And how did you have a rainy day fund or something like that?
well, we did. It was not large enough, but yeah. So we ate through our rainy day fund pretty quickly in dealing with all this. And so that's problematic for us. We're a small town, 2,000 people, 1.3 square miles. Our annual budget is $4 million. And we had damage to our wastewater treatment plant that was over $1 million. So, a quarter of our annual budget in damages at one site in our town. So, the public infrastructure itself suffered quite a bit, and we are still struggling financially to do that. So, FEMA came in, and I'll caution you. This is just a word of caution of something that I learned. FEMA came in and said, "Oh yeah, it's real simple. Just track this debris came from here. It went into this container and it went there. Keep the bill of lading and note where it originated." Well, it's much more complicated than that. And as I said, we ended up having to move things several different times. So keeping that chain of custody basically was much more difficult than you might anticipate in a much simpler scenario. So,
And so at some point, did you just have to stop because you ran out of resources?
well, we ultimately then got FEMA and the Virginia Department of Emergency Management because there was a disaster
I
declaration,
see. Yeah.
meaning there was
Yeah.
federal and state money that came in. And so the debris management was something that the state ultimately stepped in and took over at that point. But that, we were months into recovery at that point before that actually happened. So, you know, it's something you need to start dealing with as soon as the waters recede. It's not something you can wait months in order to handle. So,
So from your perspective, we're sitting here in March. We know that hurricanes show up in the summer. Um, is there, if you could wave a magic wand, what information would you want today to help you make sure you're going into next hurricane season uh, with some level of confidence and protection?
Yeah. Excellent question, and obviously something that I've been thinking a whole lot about, both last year and this year's hurricane seasons. So, our flood modeling we thought was pretty good, and that has been refined. And actually, FEMA, at the time the flood occurred, FEMA was in the process of updating our base flood elevation maps. Um,
Yeah.
but with that being said, the complicating factor that I mentioned where that dam had to release and ended up creating four more feet of water than we had anticipated. So, now my position needs to be, okay, if they're telling me I'm going to get 24 feet of water, which is what happened to us here, I'm going to need to prepare for 30 feet. I'm going to have to err on the side of caution, and make sure, we get people out of the way, we get as much movable things out of the way as we possibly can. Now it will be easier to do. People, when we told them before, were not quite as concerned as they should have been. I mentioned the campground with the
Yeah.
number of campers that people said, I'm not going to move it. I'll just take my chances. And they lost in that bet. So, those kinds of things, I think now, as we come in and tell people, but what we don't want to happen is for us to be crying wolf, every time a
Yeah.
forecast comes
Yeah.
in and says, okay, it's
Right.
going to be 24 feet. And I say, okay, we're going to prepare for 30 feet. And then everybody does that. And then it comes in at 23 feet, let's say. And they all say, well, now I don't really have to prepare as much. We need to figure out ways to be much more precise in what we're anticipating the actual flood levels will be. And like I said, I recognize for sure that's easier said than done, but it is something that affects us pretty significantly
Yeah.
um, when we're located where we are.
That's a tough spot to be in for sure. Trying to read the tea leaves there. So once again, if anyone has any questions, just raise your hand, and we'll bring you in. Just in the last few minutes of our discussion here, do you have? Oh, well, let me jump over to Samuel here first, with a question. Samuel, go ahead. Samuel, are you muted? Well, put your question in the chat then, Samuel. Sorry about that, and we'll see if we can bring you in. Yeah. So while we're getting that sorted out, are do, is there any tools you have, any legacy tools, or to help you with these decisions that you have that need to be updated or brought up to date, or do you feel that there's different approaches needed?
Yeah, and that's another really good question that, I think there are a multitude of answers possible here. So, we've been working pretty hard on updating our modeling scenarios. We've added new gauges to the river so that we can tell, where peaks are occurring and we can get a better idea of what how flooding is going to affect us. The old NFIP flood maps were based on 10-foot contours
Yeah.
for elevations, and now we've got LIDAR, which is to within a quarter of an inch, and so they're updating the base flood elevations based on that, as I said. So those kinds of things are helping. But again, the difficulties in modeling. We've talked about AEP, which is American Electric Power,
Yeah.
is the one that operates the Claytor Lake Dam. We've been working on improving coordination with them so that we have more advance notice if they are going to need to do a release like that. That was an emergency situation, we understand, but having just a matter of hours in order to prepare for that was
Well,
not adequate, especially when those hours were in the middle of the night.
so let me ask you about that, Terry, because it seems like the questions come in on the Q&A on this. I had mentioned put the questions in on the chat, but they come in the Q&A. So Samuel's question was, Samuel, if you're there, you're welcome to jump in and ask it. But he wanted to know how the dam levels are measured currently. How do you know what the levels are there currently?
Yeah, and that's self-reported by AEP basically. So they've got their own control of the dam then. And we used to have someone, excuse me, someone local that was making decisions about that dam and how it was releasing
Mm-hmm.
water. And AEP has ultimately now moved that operation to Ohio, which is where their headquarters are. And so it's somebody making those decisions remotely. And that's a little bit concerning to us because, they're not quite as familiar with how the river itself behaves and
Yeah.
how the actions that they're taking are going to affect the river. Uh, so yeah, better communication, better coordination with them. We've got emergency plans in place. We do annual tabletop exercises with them about dam failure and that type of thing. But that's something that we see as a potential area for improvement as well. And that's basically a private entity that's operating that dam. Then we need to get information from them in order to be able to make decisions downstream. So good
Okay.
question.
So we got a question from Bronwyn. Is the goal for advanced warning and dam monitoring as heavy rain or other dramatic weather is present? And I think if the question is to the challenge, I think we would want to know how that advanced warning and monitoring can play into the pre-disaster recovery. But let me turn this over to Terry and ask, is that an important data source for you for this advanced warning and dam monitoring?
Sure, absolutely it would be. So, we're relying on weather forecasts that are telling us, how much rain we're going to get, and therefore using that as inputs for the modeling that we're doing all along the upstream portions of the New River. So, improvements to the weather forecast can affect that. Improvements, as we said, to the operation of the dam and how that's being handled could help us. We're pulling together a lot of information, and in essence, it's coming from a number of different sources. And so the more we can coordinate those things or get that information all into one place would be beneficial to us. Our county Department of Emergency Management is collecting this data. They're giving us updates the entire week beforehand. We had been getting daily updates on what was going to happen, and as I said, we thought we knew where the flood level was going to be, and we were well prepared for that, and ended up being 4 feet higher than that. So, yeah.
Yeah. Let me ask just while we're still got a few more minutes, so please bring your questions in. But one of the things I'd want to ask you, Terry, is from your experience. So you have experience with the city of Radford and the town of Narrows, and they look kind of different. They look different than Roanoke, and they look different than say Duffield.
Yep.
What do you see? What are the big differences there in terms of capacity and compared to what do you think might work better in a larger, more compact town than a more spread out region? Because we've really got all sorts in that region. And is there anything that might work better in a given environment?
Yeah. Okay. Another great question there, and I'll use Radford and Narrows as a kind of comparison there. Both of them had similar levels of flooding. Radford is just below the Clater Dam, so they're the first to be hit by the dam overflow, and then it comes down to us about 30 minutes later. So the advantage, if you can call it that, I'll use quotes around that. The
Yeah,
advantage that Radford had there is the amount of infrastructure, buildings, things like that are in their 100-year floodplain is much less than the town of Narrows. And part of it is evolution over time. Narrows, as I said, has the three bodies of water. And so in its early development stages, when settlers came here in the late 1700s, they started building right on the river and right on the creeks because that was advantageous to them. Ultimately, we now would not do that, but we have quite a bit of buildings. A good portion of our historic downtown area is in the 100-year floodplain.
yeah,
And that's, a whole other set of problems that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis is how do we manage development in that area?
yeah.
Uh,
Okay,
so, yeah.
we've got a couple of questions lined up here. I want to make sure I
Okay.
get to them. From Ashley, would it also help to have a centralized location for coordinating pre or post-event debris clearing resources? You mentioned the PSA, maybe also contractors, town employees, nonprofits, volunteers, outside federal employees, etc.
Yes. Yes to all of that. And that's what ultimately happened to us, uh, kind of on the fly. We had an overwhelming amount of volunteer labor that came to us pretty quickly. We had, uh, I guess it was 400, 500 cadets from the Virginia Tech Cadet Corps that came in about a week after that to help us with debris management. We had a number of faith-based organizations, the local churches that sent volunteers to help us with things. So yes, I think that would be something that we definitely would want to capture in this kind of larger resiliency plan, if you will, for what resources we need to tap into. It's a little bit difficult to have contact information, for instance, for
Yeah,
them because
yeah,
that changes pretty frequently. But just knowing who the resources are and who you might be able to call to ask for things would definitely be something that we ended up having to gather that on the fly, or we had people approaching us,
yeah.
which was great. Um, relative to that, the other thing we pretty quickly created was one central repository where people could go in and say, I want to volunteer. Here's where my time is available, and here's what I can do for you, what tools I have, things like that. And then we had one person coordinating that, and we got that set up within a few days after the flood event, and that
Okay,
helped us to channel that.
Terry, I just want to squeeze in this one last question here before
Sure.
we end here. Does the debris collection involve debris from residential houses, like building and construction waste and white goods? If so, will the resident have a schedule from the township for collecting different type of debris, or can they just pile everything in front of their house within a certain period of time and wait for the township to collect?
Yeah, so we did that both ways actually. We put as many roll-off containers as we could in areas of the town that people could get to so they could bring it themselves. But we also had collection, and we do that normally. We do that weekly here where we can pick up waste. So we had more frequent trips where we went out and collected stuff that people who couldn't get it to the containers, we could pick it up for them. So yeah, that's also a good point.
Okay, well, we're at 1 o'clock here. I thank everyone for your time listening. Terry, thank you so much for being the font of all this information. It is invaluable. So thank you so much for taking the time. And please, applicants, if you have any questions, stay in touch with us. Look at the website, and we're happy to help. And keep an eye out for the next webinar. Thank you all very much.